All right, hello everyone, and today I want to continue with my series of. Um, Sorry, I have to adjust something. Hold on. Testing. All right, so is my mic working? Um, yeah, hopefully my mic is working. I had to untangle the wires because they were becoming insubordinate. So I'm just sorry. I'm checking my audio test. All right, so that should be fine. Now, so today I would like to continue with my series called Politics and Religion, or it could be called Power and Religion, right? So same thing, right? Politics is all about the distribution and organization of power in the world. So how power is structured, how power is arranged, and in what form does power manifest in the world, right? This is what politics is all about. And so where do we leave off? Well, let's have like a slight summary, right? So first, we have to understand human history and evolution, right? So here's right. So here's how humans evolve, right? So humans go from tribalism, right? Tribalism to feudalism, right? Or aristocracy, right? And then from aristocracy, you go to democracy. So this is what has happened historically. And so the political or the governing form of society has changed from tribalism to feudalism to aristocracy, right? And let me erase this. And so why do we go from tribalism to feudalism to democracy? Democracy. Why are these different historical forms of political governance changing? Right. This is concomitant with a change in human intelligence on the population level. So our brains become bigger over time. So we become more intelligent over time, right? So at first, maybe we're only like 50 IQ, right? And then we evolve to be more intelligent. So maybe we're like 75 IQ here. And then we evolve to be even more intelligent, right? So these IQ estimates are not like, I'm not saying they're empirically true, but my point is like, okay, let's say we evolve from a lower IQ, a lower level of intelligence to a higher level of intelligence, right? So with an increased average intelligence of human beings comes a more complex social contract, more pro-social behavior, a more complex economy, a more rational society, right? So the people become more far-sighted. They plan for longer time horizons, right? So they're better at complex problem solving. And they're able to predict the future, right? So the future is, you can think of it as a fiction that we make up with our minds, because the only thing that is real, right? The only epistemic certainty is that something exists in this immediate moment, right? So you can really but the ability to make abstractions and to imagine different possibilities. This comes from a more complex cognitive faculty, right? So this comes with the development of intelligence. So why do humans become more intelligent over time? Because of natural selection in harsh environments, and because there are limited resources and limited women, there are limited opportunities to reproduce. So men will fight each other and kill each other, or just starve or get exiled, right? For the competition for resources and women. So the more intelligent and more strong men will reproduce more than men who are less intelligent and less strong, right? So that's why humans evolved to be more intelligent, stronger, and taller, and more healthy over time, right? This is the process of harsh Darwinian selection and genetic adaptation to the environment. And remember, everything I say in this video is for educational and entertainment purposes. Everything I do is speculative philosophy. So, I'm just saying this disclaimer for the community guidelines. This video is all satire, right? Now, so here's tribal people living under tribalism, right? What they do is they're going to form packs of humans, right? And they're just gonna kill other packs of humans, right? So there's tribes, they're warring against other tribes, and everyone's killing each other, right? And so because of this harsh Darwinian selection, people become more and more intelligent. And so because more intelligent people will understand and be able to realize the benefits of pro-social behavior, which is why the tribes will expand, right? Because people become more cooperative and more willing to, engage in a social contract with more and more people. And so, there's also like the innovation of like agriculture, right? Because people become intelligent enough to come up with the idea of, like planting seeds in the ground and like waiting for a season, and, extracting the food resources from the ground, right? So eventually you evolve from tribalism to feudalism, right? And so with feudalism comes a hierarchy, right? Of kings at the top, right? Kings and nobles, right? Right, kings and nobles at the top, and then there's the peasants at the bottom, right? So why is there a hierarchy in feudalism? Well, there's a hierarchy in tribalism too. There's gonna be chiefs, right? Under tribal society, there's gonna be the head honcho of your tribe, right? The chieftain. I think that's what the word is, right? And then the tribal leader is gonna have be able to have access to more resources and more women, so he's gonna reproduce more. Because, all else equal, you would expect that, the leader of the tribe is more intelligent and more strong and more healthy than the other members of the tribe, right? So he's going to reproduce more, and that's why, a natural genetic adaptation occurs, right? You can even see this is eugenics, right? This is a eugenic process, right? And I'm not advocating eugenics. This is just a descriptive and educational video. Now, so in feudalism, the hierarchy is even more stratified and distinctive, right? There's a clear difference between the nobles and the biggest king, the biggest noble, and the weakest and most poor peasant, right? There's a clear socioeconomic differentiation in feudalism. Right, so there's a hierarchy. So that's aristocracy, right? Where basically the kings and the nobles have the monopoly of power over society, right? And then what happens is that because the kings, first of all, they need to organize a lot of people for the purpose of war, right? So if you're a king, but you're competing with other kings and nobles for power, right? And for land, for money, right? So you need soldiers, and you need someone to organize the logistics behind all your wars, right? And you need someone to command the soldiers. So you're gonna need generals, right? And you're also gonna need just basic administrators, literate professionals who are capable of, being able to document all your soldiers and making sure that, if you command them to meet up at this time to train, if you command them to like fight this other noble family, right? You have to make sure they actually show up. You have to make sure you identify who is who. You have to identify how much you have to pay these guys. You have to engage in a lot of documentation and analysis to be able to, logistically handle war, right? And you also have to give a lot of power to these generals, right? So the kings are losing a lot of power over time. The more monarchy expands, the weaker the kings get, which is quite ironic, right? Because the more estates a king has, the more assets and holdings and estates a king has, the more land a king controls, the more people a king has to manage. He has to give more power to the bureaucrats, right? To manage his estate, right? So who are these bureaucrats? The bureaucrats are the educated intellectuals, right? These are the literate few people in society, right? So maybe like 20% of the society is literate, and they could even potentially qualify to be a bureaucrat and work for a king as an advisor or as an administrator, right? Or as a poet or as a priest, right? So, because most of the people are illiterate, right? So, eventually, because the king's estate expands and they need to rely more on bureaucrats to manage their real estate and their land holdings and their assets and their finances, right? Because they need to rely more on these bureaucrats. The bureaucrats become more powerful and more numerous, right? There's more people. There's more career investment into these bureaucrats, right? The bureaucrat market is hot, right? If you're intelligent enough, I'm sure a king is willing to hire you to manage his estate and to also help him strategize, his political plans and his military strategies, right? And eventually warfare becomes less physical, right? So what is the purpose of going to war? It's actually a very stupid idea. Especially starting a war. Starting the war is really a dumb idea, right? Because first of all, you're gonna challenge this other king because like you want his land, right? And you make up some shit like, oh, okay, so clearly this king has stolen my land because it was my right to have it because this church said that I have the right to this land, or like, oh, there was some like vague dispute where like my cousin beat up your cousin stole my girl, and some random shit happened, okay? They make some shit up. And, yeah, okay, now we're in a fight, okay? And so, if you're the king, the dumbest thing you can do is actually to start a war, because now you have to fight on someone else's territory. You're gonna have to march like 100 kilometers, maybe 500 kilometers. You have to march, and then you're gonna what? You need your soldiers to carry all their supplies and their heavy armor, and then you have to somehow pay for this entire war. So like, who's going to fund this war, right? Because like, you can extract more taxation from the peasants, but they might revolt against you. You might like beg other nobles to be like, please give me money, I want to expand the territory of my land, please give me money, right? Maybe the nobles will agree because they'll be like, oh look, if our king becomes richer, then we'll be richer, right? Maybe, okay, but maybe they'll be like, no, this is stupid, why are we getting caught up in a war? Why do we have to fund your expedition, right? This is terrible. So starting a war is just very strategically delusional, right? It's very unsound. And so the best idea is really to wait for someone to fight you, right? Because then you have the advantage of being on your home turf, right? You can sabotage them instead of engaging in direct warfare. It's much cheaper, less people die, and less people hate you, right? Because even if you're a great general, right, or let's say you're a king with very great generals and you have the best soldiers, and like, okay, and then now you think, okay, I'm going to take over all of Europe, right? I'm going to take over an entire continent. I'm going to take over everyone. I'm going to make all my enemies pacified, make them acquiesce to me, right? Make all my enemies be subordinates of me, and we're just going to take over the world, okay? The problem is now at some point, maybe in the beginning, people will be like, wow, you're a legend. Wow, you're like an amazing king because like look how many lands you're conquering, right? And look how much prosperity you're bringing to some of your people, right? Because like, oh, like you're stealing gold, you're looting other people, right? You're making your enemies pay you money so that you don't kill them because like, oh, your military is the best, blah blah blah. Okay, eventually your commoners are gonna hate you because at some point you're gonna be in debt because you're wasting your money on wars. Your soldiers are gonna be tired. They're gonna revolt. The peasants are gonna revolt because they're like, yo, why are we fighting these wars, right? And a bunch of people are going to die, right? A lot of innocent people are gonna get killed, and so it's like, okay, it doesn't matter how great of a general you are. Like a prolonged warfare isn't gonna benefit you. Well, it's not gonna benefit anyone, but especially it's not gonna benefit you because you're the one starting the wars and nobody likes you anymore, right? You're wasting people's money. You're killing people. Right, and you're not even fighting your own war because you're the king, right? So you know nobody likes you at some point, right? So well, even if you're like on the battlefield, okay, you're out here eating steak and chicken, right? Your soldiers, you're probably they're eating oatmeal or something, right? So like people are looking at you like, yo, this guy's out here forcing us to die, but he can have 100 houses, he can live in a mansion, right? He got castles and kingdoms, and us soldiers, us peasants, we're living like impoverished, right? So like you have to be stupid to want a prolonged warfare, right? So a better way at winning wars is to engage in diplomacy, basically engage in propaganda and engage in like negotiations or arguments, right? So like instead of conquering people by physical force, what you'll do is you're going to hire a bunch of priests, intellectuals, and scribes, and they're going to manufacture propaganda to your advantage, right? So I'm going to hire an intellectual. He's going to write an essay about how I'm the most handsome king, how I'm the most intelligent king, I'm the most virtuous and just ruler, and therefore I should have control over all of this territory. I should have a monopoly of decision-making power over this land, right? And I'm going to hire a priest, and he's going to say that I am ordained by God to rule over all of this territory. God gives me the right to do whatever I want in this territory and to have a decision-making monopoly. And if you disagree with me, we're going to kill you because God said that we can kill you, right? So that's how it works. And then I'm going to have scribes. They're going to copy all of these essays and all of these poems, right? I'm going to hire a poet, and he's going to write poems about how I'm the greatest person ever. I'm better than Jesus or whatever, right? I'm so good, okay? And then I'm going to get scribes to copy all of these documents. We're going to spread them out everywhere, right? And so the illiterate masses, they can't do anything to be unconvinced, right? They're stupid and they're illiterate. So they're just going to go along with it, right? And they're just going to... And they can't do it if they're peasants, okay? So I'll tax them, I take their money, I force them to engage in slave labor. What are you going to do? They can't do shit. And the literate people, right? The few people who are literate, some of them might realize it's propaganda and be like, okay, clearly, like my core intellectuals, clearly they're lying. Clearly these poets are lying. Clearly that these priests and these religious leaders, clearly they're lying on my behalf because they're like, wait a moment, did this guy kill like 100 people? This guy like a murderer. This guy's, this guy stole a bunch of money. This guy's not a good person, right? But it doesn't matter if what they say is true, because as long as these intellectuals say I'm the best person ever and I never did anything wrong, as long as I pay a bunch of propagandists to keep lying, it doesn't matter what the truth is, as long as people submit to me, right? And so the few people who are literate, right, like 20%, maybe like 80% of people are illiterate, the other 20% are literate, right? The few people who are literate, they actually are very happy that I'm paying propagandists, because these literate people are like, hey, I want to work for this king, right? I want to be the employee of this king so that I can write lies and write essays and write poems and get paid to be a court advisor or intellectual or a bureaucrat, right? I want to be a bureaucrat of this king, right? So yeah. And so, so yeah, more intellectuals get hired because, why? What's the point of engaging in physical conflict when you can just pay some bureaucrats to make lies about you, right? And remember, these bureaucrats are already managing your estate as king, so you might as well, give them even more power and, let them write propaganda in your favor, blah, 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 right? And so, if the propaganda campaign works, then why would anyone fight for the opposing team, right? Because people are convinced, oh my God, this guy, is the son of God. This guy has the divine right to rule. his enemies are Satanists, right? This virtuous king, he's the most handsome, most intelligent, most virtuous person. But everyone's gonna fight for you, and they're not gonna fight for the other guy, right? So your competitor, he needs to hire a bunch of propagandists. He needs to hire a bunch of bureaucrats to manage his estate. Okay, so now eventually politics becomes the de facto game of bureaucrats, right? So eventually, the political power is transferred from kings and nobles to bureaucrats, right? Simply because the kings, an individual can't be that powerful, right? The kings only became powerful because of their reputation and their family background, right? So because a lot of people recognize the king as coming from a family which is well recognized in the land, and because the king is wealthy, and because he was considered trustworthy and has high social status, that's why he became king. But he's still just an individual. He can't possibly manage over these estates, and his family isn't gonna be able to either, right? Even it doesn't matter how many baby mamas he has, right? So he's gonna need to hire a bunch of bureaucrats and then give a bunch of power to the bureaucrats, and then eventually the bureaucrats have all the power, right? So democracy. So now here's a democracy, right? Basically, democracy, there's still a hierarchy, right? So there's in a democracy now the hierarchy is different. So there's the commoners, right? The normal people at the bottom, and then there's the bureaucrats at the top, right? There's the bureaucrats. Right. And then at the top, above the bureaucrats, are gonna be the oligarchs, right? So people who have just a disproportionate amount of economic and political influence. So they're sort of analogous to the nobles, except they can actually affect democratic policy to their advantage, right? But really, the oligarchs and bureaucrats, they're sort of integrated together, right? So before, maybe there was some distinction between the intellectuals and the kings, like the nobles and the bureaucrats, right? Before there was some distinction, right? Now the oligarchs and the bureaucrats, right? They're happy to be integrated because everyone is part of the same hive mind, right? Everyone's part of the same democratic hive mind, since democracy comes with an egalitarian moral assumption. So now we go from tribalism to feudalism to democracy, right? Now, how does the religions change, right? Sorry. How does the religions change, right? So, and remember, none of my ideas are original, right? A lot of these ideas are very heavily inspired by Professor Zhang, the predictive history guy, right? Also Hot-Turbid Hoppa, right? I'm going to talk about Hoppa's democracy argument later. So, yeah, I don't claim originality for these ideas. Now, right, so in a tribalistic society, basically human life revolves around immediate conflict and cooperation at a very concrete and close-knit function, right? So basically under tribalism, there's a bunch of small competing tribes, basically extended families that compete with each other for resources and women, right? And so the dominant religion of these times is polytheism, right? Because there's no like one supreme authority that people can appeal to. People are just killing each other or sometimes intermarrying with each other. And then, so when these tribes intermarry with each other eventually, then tribes become city-states and city-states become like nations, right? Yeah. So, and then you move from tribalism to feudalism or aristocracy / monarchy. So under monarchy, the dominant god becomes a monotheistic patriarch, right? Because a monotheistic patriarch is analogous to one king, right? There's one king, and he is the worldly equivalent to the Sky King, which is God, right? The monotheistic God. And you know the reason, if you're a king, the reason you want monotheism is because so everyone already believes in God, right? They're pagans or they're polytheists, right? Or they believe in different kinds of spirits, whatever. So if you want to be king, what you want to do is you want to make up a god that's more powerful than everyone else's, right? So you're gonna say that, okay, my God is the ultimate God, and he created all your gods. That's why you need to submit to me, because my God gave me the right to have absolute rule over this territory, right? So my God is more powerful than your gods, therefore you should worship my God, and therefore you should worship me, the new king, right? Democracy goes from monotheism to secular reason, right? So you can't have a monotheistic God under democracy, because this would mean that there's a hierarchy on the metaphysical level, right? So you can't allow a hierarchy in religion in democracy, right? So you need a new religion called secular reason, right? You're going to worship the God of reason. You're going to worship the God of secular rationality. And so what does it mean? It just means the leftist trinity. So the God of reason is just the leftist trinity. And what is the leftist trinity? It is moral universalism, democracy, and egalitarianism, right? So it's basically democracy and egalitarianism. So you can just think of it as just egalitarianism, because that's what it is, right? And so why do you want an egalitarian society under democracy? Because a democracy is the bureaucrats being in charge, right? So, okay, let me elaborate a bit more. Right. Right, so under tribalism, who is in charge? The tribal chief, right? But the chief of a tribe isn't really that powerful, because yeah, he's the head of like maybe 100 people, 200 people, right? But there's like another tribal chief like literally 10 kilometers away, and there's like, if these two tribes fight each other and kill each other, it's hard to say who will win, right? These guys, because this is a very chaotic scenario in tribalism. Okay, under monarchy, a king is in charge, right? The king is the head honcho. He has the monopoly of power over a territory. And generally, there's no controversy who the king is, right? Because the king is basically the noble, right? The guy of the highest status. Why does he have the highest status? What does it mean for him to have the highest status? It means his family has been the wealthiest for 200 years or whatever, right? Why? Because his family are the best businessmen. They're the most talented. They're the best artisans, right? They have good reputation. They have good networking skills. They have good social skills. So they're well connected, right? So the king is the head of his clan, right? And the king is the guy who has more support from the peasants and support from other nobles than anyone else, right? So because the king's social status and therefore his actual power is derived from the fact that he has more powerful connections than anyone else, right? So to even fight the king is stupid, right? Why would you fight the guy who has 100 landlords backing him, right? If you have nobody backing you and none of the commoners know who you are, why would you fight the king, right? So you can't challenge the king. Whereas under tribalism, if you're a random nobody, you could probably fight the tribal chief, right? Like, you challenge him to a fight, you beat him up, now you become the new tribal king, right? Now you become the new chief, right? So, whereas you can't challenge the king because the dude, the dude's family's been around for 200 years. They're the richest guys on the block, and the king has 1,000 friends who have a lot of money, whereas you have 10 friends, they don't have much money. So why are you going to challenge the king? You're not doing shit, okay? You're not doing. You should be a peasant or be a landlord, but don't challenge the king, right? So the king is the absolute authority under monarchy. Under democracy, who's the new leaders? The new leaders nominally is the bureaucrat class, right? It's really the oligarchs in democracy become the wealthiest, right? Oligarchs are just the guys with the most economic and political power who are similar to the nobles, but they don't necessarily need great reputation or great recognition among the masses like kings do, right? But the oligarchs are basically integrated with the bureaucracy, right? So under democracy, the bureaucrats are in charge. Why are the bureaucrats in charge? Because there's a transition period from monarchy to democracy. Why does this happen? Because the kings become more and more powerful, right? They're engaged in warfare with each other. And because power accumulates to the fewest people possible, power rests in the hands of a few kings. Why does power accumulate to the fewest people? Because power can be expressed mostly in terms of powerful connections. The more powerful connections you have, the more powerful you are, right? So if I have connections to Donald Trump, Benjamin Netanyahu, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, right? If I have a bunch of powerful connections and you don't have any connections, right? Your connections are, your uncle who owns one house, right? Some homeless man across the street, some McDonald's worker, right? You don't have any connections. I have more connections than you. My connections are more powerful than you. You're a loser. You're nothing to me, right? I will buy your house, right? I could probably buy your entire family because you're nothing, right? So power is all about connections. And the more connections you already have, the easier it is to form new connections, right? Because if you want to make a connection, if you want to be friends with the guy who has 10 billionaire friends, so do you want to be friends with the guy whose friends are like 25 different billionaires and 70 different senators and 80 different presidents? Or do you want to be the friend with the guy who's only friends with McDonald's workers, Burger King workers, some random truck driver, some homeless man on the street? Of course you want to be connected to the guy who has more powerful connections, right? So the more connections you have, that's why power accumulates to very few people. And so under monarchy, just a few kings have most of the power, have a disproportionate amount of power. But the kings have to give their power away to bureaucrats, right? Because how can you manage such a big estate, right? If millions of people are living under you and there's like a million households you have to rule over, there's like all this territory, right? There's like thousands of square kilometers that you have to be the regulator of. You actually can't take care of anything, right? So you need to hire a bunch of intellectuals, educated bureaucrats to manage everything for you, to be your advisors, administrators, and deal with the logistics, right? And then you give all this power to the bureaucrats. Now the bureaucrats become in charge, right? Now you hired 50 bureaucrats, and you're one king with, you have your noble family, but even they don't get along because they're still trying to steal power from each other, right? So the bureaucrat class becomes the most powerful. They become the ruling elites, right? So now under democracy, the bureaucrats are in charge. And so the new religion goes from monotheism to secular reason. And so let me explain the transition from monarchy to democracy, right? Right, so now we go from monarchy to democracy. Right, so the religion goes from a monotheistic, divine, patriarch God, right? And then to a secular reason, right? Moral universalism. Egalitarianism. right? So look, um, basically, we went from the governing and the societal system of monarchy to democracy, right? And so we've changed gods from a monotheistic patriarch god to the god of secular reason. And secular reason just means moral universalism, democracy, and egalitarianism, right? So this is the leftist trinity. The leftist or secular trinity, right? And so you can say, and this is also, okay, so the transition from monarchy to democracy is also concomitant with the victory of the left over the right, right? Right, you can see the French Revolution as the proof of this. And so now the meta-narrative, the shared meta-narrative in the collective unconscious of the people changes. What does this mean? It means basically the idea of the ideal world changes in the minds of people, right? So let me explain. So you have monarchy. Okay. So okay, look. So under a monarchy, there is the subconscious and underlying idea that Earth shit is aligned with heaven, right? So everything that happens on Earth, right? The state of affairs on Earth corresponds to the state of affairs on heaven, right? And so because Earth has a hierarchy where the king is at the top, heaven has a hierarchy where God is at the top, right? And so where does the king derive his right to rule from nominally, right? From God, right? So the king of the earth is like supposed to be analogous to the king of heaven, right? So the king of this life, the worldly life, is supposed to be analogous to the king of the afterlife, which is God, right? So basically, every single society has a shared fiction among the people, right? The people believe in this fiction because it gives them a sense of purpose. It gives them an eschatology, right? And it allows them to know what is right or wrong, and what will make them happy, right? So in a monarchy, the shared fiction is the idea of the kingdom of heaven, right? Because Earth exists as a kingdom with the king at the top and with everyone having their roles in the hierarchy, right? So the hierarchy is like the king at the top, then there's the nobles, then there's the knights, the priests, the poets, the artisans, the merchants, and then there's the commoners, the peasants, the slaves, right? So everyone's on the hierarchy in a monarchic system, right? And so they also project the hierarchy of Earth onto the hierarchy of heaven, right? So they say, okay, in the same way that the king is at the top of the hierarchy on Earth, God is the king of heaven, so God is at the top of the hierarchy on heaven, right? So where does the king derive his right to rule? From heaven, right? From God, right? So there's like a correspondence between the world and the fictional world up above, right? Whereas in democracy, right, the shared fiction is no longer hierarchical, because under the new religion where reason is the god, right? Reason is the god, so everyone with a rational faculty is just as much of a king and a sovereign as anyone else, right? So because you have to form an ideological corpus that is in direct opposition to monarchy, right? So you have to form an anti-hierarchical religion, okay? The new religion becomes Enlightenment rationalism, where, okay, the king isn't the supreme authority anymore. Now everyone is a supreme authority. And so with you have people like Kant, who says that because every human with a rational faculty can worship the god of reason, then every individual who can do this is a sovereign, right? It's just as sovereign as the king. So under the new democratic ideology, everyone becomes king, so to speak. Now, so what is the new kingdom of heaven in a secular democratic ideology, right? Well, because the king is now everyone, right? Because under democracy, democracy is anti-hierarchical because it's the opposite of monarchy, which is hierarchical, right? So under the new democratic religion, now the new king is the least intelligent Democrat, right? I mean, the least intelligent democracy supporter. Right? So let's say you have a society where everyone supports democracy and you're living under the leftist Trinitarian world, right? Now, the new supreme ruler is the most retarded member of the group, right? It's the most stupid, the least intelligent member of the group. Why? Because equality presumes maximal inclusivity, right? Which means that you can't exclude him from the group, right? But you also can't allow someone who's too competent be, your professed leader, right? Your professed leader, the leader that everyone agrees on, has to be the most stupid person in the group in order to meet the constraints of egalitarianism, right? So the king, under a secular democratic religion, the new hierarchy is like this. The most retarded person, the dumbest person, the lowest common denominator is the supreme ruler, like Kim Jong-un, right? And some 50 IQ guy, right, who's just intelligent enough to recite the leftist trinity and not intelligent enough to do anything else, right? He's the new king. And so therefore, and because democracy supports moral universalism, which basically means that everyone should have the same thoughts as everyone else, right? So everyone should have the same rights as everyone else. Why? Because everyone is the same as everyone else, right? Egalitarianism. So everyone should be part of the same hive minds, right? So in other democracies, look, under the new leftist trinity, we need to combine everyone's brains into one so that everyone's just a servant of the hive mind. Once we create the hive mind where all the consciousnesses become one consciousness, then the entire hive mind must submit to the least intelligent member in order to fulfill the criteria of maximal inclusivity, right? So now under the democratic utopia, everyone becomes a slave to the biggest retard, right? So that's democracy. And so that's the kingdom of heaven to the democratic worldview, where instead of a hierarchy, instead of having a king on earth matching a king on heaven, right? Instead of having an ideal utopia where you live in the kingdom of heaven in the afterlife with God, well, instead under the secular utopia, it's not even in heaven, right? Because that would assume that there's a hierarchy of space-time, right? So no, you can't have that. It's like, okay, the ideal utopia for the leftist Democrats, the secular rationalists, right? The ideal utopia is not the kingdom of heaven, which would correspond to the kingdom of earth. No, it's the hive mind, right? It's the hive mind where everyone is equalized, so that either they become a retard or they become the servants of the most stupid person ever, right? So that is the idealized utopia of the left, aka the secular trinity, right? And so remember, everything I say in this video is for educational, entertainment, comedic, and satirical purposes, right? All of this is speculation. So yeah, that's a new religion, basically. Now, let me tell you the problems with democracy, right? So we go from having a king as the ruler to having elected officials, right? And then so here are the people. Okay, so let's compare some social, political differences between monarchy and democracy. So under monarchy, there is a clear distinction between the commoners, right, the subjects of the king, and the king himself, right? There's a difference between the royals of the society, who are the ruling elite, and the commoners, who are the subjects, right? There's a clear distinction. And so you can say that there is a class consciousness, right, in the public, right? So the masses know that the kings may not always have the interests of the public at heart, right? So if you're part of the masses and, the king is trying to raise taxes, right, you may really revolt, right? You and the fellow peasants will be like, hey, the king's trying to steal our money through taxation so that he can have wars that he's not even going to fight himself, so that he can steal our money, so that he can build a house for himself and his new wife, right? So, like, look, the king's trying to steal our money, right? The king's trying to steal our property, so let's revolt, right? So there's a class consciousness between the king and the public, right? So right? So there's so under a monarchy, there's a clear separation between the host and the parasite, right? So the parasite class, insofar as the king is taxing people and stealing their money and stealing their property, right? Or like trying to, um like engage in monetary inflation and therefore steal money from people that way, right? You could do that if you like make a bunch of like gold coins that, eventually you inflate the currency so much it's worth nothing, right? But like, you gain from it because you can buy resources. And then the plebs, they it's gotta be their savings are worthless now, right? Right. So you can think of in a society, right? There are parasitic activities and there are productive activities, right? Within the set of productive activities, these are conducted by the hosts of society. Within the set of parasitic activities, these are conducted by the leeches of society, right? And so obviously the parasites are dependent on the host. The hosts are being stolen from the parasites, right? And so if you're a commoner and you're farming every day, right? And the king is like, hey, I'm going to raise tax rates by 10%. You guys are like, hey, the king is exploiting us, right? Let's revolt against the king. We're the commoners. The king is stealing our money. Let's beat up the king, right? Let's jump him, right? And let's assassinate this guy, right? And so there's a clear distinction between the host and the king. And so there's a clear class consciousness in monarchy between the peasants and the king. In a democracy, this is the opposite, right? In a democracy, the class consciousness doesn't exist anymore because not everyone is the king, right? So because everyone is supposedly part of the government, there is no more class consciousness, right? So if a policy goes wrong and people's money are being stolen from, if there's an economic recession, if people are getting killed in war, who do you blame? You can't blame anyone because everyone's part of the democracy, right? Everyone's the leader in democracy. Right? You can always blame someone else. You can say, oh, it's because this guy voted. Or you're the elected official, right? You're the president. You're like, oh, don't blame me. Blame yourself for voting, right? So there's no, you can't hold anyone accountable in democracy, right? And so the democratic state, right? So the bureaucracy can just keep stealing your money, right? These bureaucrats can steal your money all they want to engage in public spending, right? To engage in very inefficient policies and just steal your money and just waste your money and kill people in war. And they can these bureaucrats can engage in whatever corruption they want, but you can't hold them accountable because nobody is in charge in a democracy, right? So there's no class consciousness. Another issue is that if you have corrupt leadership in a monarchy, you could actually kill the leader, right? It's very easy because there's one head honcho, right? There's one leader, there's one king, so you can kill him. Or like, one of the royal families or a competing king or someone with power in society can just kill the king and someone else will naturally take charge. Whereas in a democracy, you can't kill anyone. You can't kill the leader because no one is the leader in democracy. Who is in charge, right? You can say, oh, it's the elected official. He's in charge. No, he got elected by the real rulers, right? So everyone is in charge in a democracy, which means no one is in charge in a democracy, which means no one can be held accountable and no one can be stopped from being corrupt. Because in a democracy, everyone is responsible for everyone's actions, so no one can be held accountable, right? And another issue is the issue of time preference in a monarchy versus a democracy, right? right? So in a monarchy, right? The time horizon of the king is actually very long, right? Because he's thinking maybe 100 years ahead, right? Because so maybe his time horizon is like 100 years, right? Right? Could be. It's gonna be generational, right? It's gonna be very long. Right. On the other hand, an elected official under democracy, right? His time horizon is 4 years or 8 years, right? He only cares about the election cycle. So, the king's political incentive is to improve the economy of his territory, and don't steal from the masses too much, right? So don't engage in too much expropriation of your commoners and your productive people, right? Because the king believes that all of the territory is his own property in the long term, right? So if you steal from the masses too much right now, if you're the king and you have a 50% tax rate and you steal from your own peasants, right? They're going to rebel against you, and then they're going to burn down your property. They're going to burn down your estates. The nobles are going to fight you, right? You're going to get beat up. You're going to get killed, right? So the king has the incentive to care about his own interests in the future. So he has a more long-term perspective, which means he wants to steal from his people less than an elected official would, right? So yes, the king's gonna steal money, right? Because he needs to fund wars and expansionary goals and whatnot, right? And it's just greedy, right? But he can't get away with too much corruption, right? Because remember, he has to pass down his title of monarchy to his heirs, right? And so if he behaves in a way that is too short-term focused, if the king behaves in a way where he's stealing too much money and he's too corrupt, right? If the king behaves in a manner that's too corrupt, his heirs are going to fight him, right? Because you're the heir of a king, and the king is being corrupt. He's being a tyrant. He's stealing money from the people. He's killing people in war. He's being corrupt, right? He's being evil. Okay, so you're the heir of the king, and you're gonna think, okay, I'm gonna assassinate the king now, right? He's your father, but you're gonna kill him, right? Because he can't. He's ruining your reputation. You're the next in line to be king. Your family is supposed to be the ruling family for the next 100 years, right? You want to maintain the monopoly of power over this territory for your family forever, right? For in the long term, right? But your king is ruining your reputation, so you kill him, right? So the king isn't going to be too corrupt because he knows, look, if I'm supposed to be the leader for eternity on this territory, at least putatively, right? So I can't act however I want. I have to not be too corrupt. I have to not expropriate from the people too much. I have to not steal too much money. I have to not engage in too much warfare, right? Otherwise, people will kill me, right? But otherwise, my heirs are going to kill me because he's next in line to be king. So I can't behave however I want, right? So the king's behavior is restrained by long-term interests. The elected official, on the other hand, is only the leader for 4 to 8 years. So his incentive is to destroy the economy as fast as possible and steal as much money as possible, as fast as possible, right? In the little amount of time he has to control the country, he wants to steal money and to kill people, right? He wants to benefit himself at the expense of everyone else in the short term, right? Because the elected official, he can't rule for very long, okay? And he needs to buy votes, right? So the best way to buy votes is basically to steal money from people and then give it back to them, right? So let's say there's 1 million voters, right? And they all want healthcare, right? So how do you fund health? And you want to fund this new healthcare program, right? Called Osama Care, right? Let's call it Osama Care, right? And in order to fund Osama Care, you need to steal $100 from everyone, right? But because it's $100 from a million people, so like if you take a bit of money out of everyone's pockets, people will think, oh, it doesn't matter, it's just a bit of money, right? But actually, the cumulative amount is actually a lot, and it's gonna worsen the economy, right? So you steal $100 from everyone in order to create Obamacare. The issue is that Obamacare is going to be terrible. It's going to be a waste of money, right? Because it's got to be a public program, and public programs are parasitic instead of productive, right? So a public program incentive is to steal more money because a public program is funded on theft or taxation, whereas a for-profit organization like a private firm, right? They are a productive entity because they can only be funded through voluntary payments rather than taxation, aka theft, right? So a private firm is more productive than a public organization like the government, right? So basically, with Obamacare, what Obamacare really is a money laundering operation. It's a theft, right? It's stealing, right? It's fraud. So what Obamacare will do is that I am the elected official. I'm going to steal $100 from my voters, and I'm going to give them $10 back, right? So I take the $90. I keep the change. The change goes to me and my family. It's going to go to some oligarchs that give me power to fund the election and to control the media, right? And so I'm going to take the money and I'm going to get rich, right? So I'm going to steal money from people, right? And so basically what elected officials do is that they need to buy votes, right? They need to buy the loyalty of voters. To buy the loyalty of voters in a democracy, if you're an elected official, is what you do is you steal money from your voters. You take their money through taxation or through public spending. It's all the same thing, right? Or through fractional reserve banking, like central banking, like printing money out your ass, which has the same effect as taxation because it devalues the currency and you get to spend it, right? So you benefit from the newly printed fiat, but the people who receive it the latest, right, the commoners, right, the productive people, they are stolen from, right? The value of the currency decreases through inflation, right? So you're an elected official, right? How do you get voted into office, and how do you stay in office? Right, you steal money from the public and you give them back a few breadcrumbs, right? So you steal $1 million and you give them back $5, right? So that's how democracy works, right? And then at first people will think that your policies might be good, right? Because you're like, look, the economy is really being stimulated because I'm injecting a bunch of fiat into the market, right? But then in the future, eventually there's a recession, or the economy is now doing bad because you stole a bunch of money and it wasn't worth it, right? Your healthcare program or whatever nonsense program you made up, it wasn't as efficient as you thought it would be, right? Because the problem is, right, you want to promise a great public program to people, but it's a parasitic program rather than a productive program, right? You're engaging in public sector activity, which is parasitic, i.e. anti-productive rather than productive, right? So because you try to sell an anti-productive product as a productive product, right? You try to sell a good so you're trying to sell a defective product as a good product, right? You're trying to sell a fraudulent service as a beneficial service, right? And then when people realize, wait, we're wasting money on a fraudulent service, and wait, the economy is in shambles, right? The economy is doing bad. By that point, either you're not in office anymore or your election term is going to be done soon. So what you're going to do is you're going to blame the bad consequences of your policies on the next guy who was elected, right? And the next guy who was elected, right, he wants to buy voters, right? So he's going to engage in the same scam that you did, right? He's going to steal money from his voters and he's going to give them a part of the money back, right? And so that's how the democracy works. So there's also another issue with democracy. So you have to understand a democratic government is basically a criminal organization, right? whereas as a monarchic rulership, right? All right, so this is something you have to understand about monarchy versus democracy. So monarchy is a competition for the best leader, right? And sometimes the issue with hereditary monarchies is that sometimes the heir is incompetent or corrupt or tyrant or whatever, right? So how do kings rise into power to begin with, right? A king rises into power because out of all the nobles, right? Out of all the most recognized, wealthy, and powerful people in the land, right? Out of all the most recognized nobles, right? There is the most recognizable of all the nobles, right? His clan is the wealthiest, the most trustworthy, right? And so everyone likes this guy, so a bunch of people back him, right? Obviously, it's more complicated than this, but generally, the guy who becomes the king at first because a lot of people support him. A lot of people really think, okay, he has the social status, the political backing, and the trustworthy reputation, and the intelligence, the farsightedness, right, and the virtuousness, right? So he has all the right virtues to be a king, right? And so he becomes a king, right? And so this is actually a good leader, right? But maybe his heir is not so good, right? So whether the heir of a virtuous king will be good or bad, it's basically like a random number generator, right? You can't really be sure. You don't know in advance, right? Maybe his son will be very competent, just like the king is, right? Because, remember, the sons of a parent are always genetically correlated to the parent's personality and intelligence, right? So, maybe the son of the king will be a great ruler, in which case there's no problem. But sometimes, okay, maybe the son of the king will be an heir that is unfit to be ruler, right? Maybe he'll be incompetent or stupid, right? Maybe he'll be mentally disabled. Maybe he's a tyrant, right? Even in the worst case scenario, a corrupt heir of a king, he becomes a tyrant. Let's say he's the worst case scenario. So the heir of the king is a tyrant. He's killing people. He's stealing money from people. Right? He's taking women by force. He's doing terrible things. Okay? He's engaging in warfare for no reason. The good thing is he's just one individual. He's one king, so you can just kill him. Right? The nobles can conspire together to kill him. The peasants can revolt and get him assassinated. Right? So it's not really a big problem. Right? And so monarchy is a competition for the best leader. And obviously, after a king dies, right, after you kill one king, there's probably another heir in line, right? So like usually the kingship, the crown goes to the oldest son, right? There's a younger son, right? His brother, maybe his sister, or maybe another noble family, right? He'll be like, let's say one noble family's king is corrupt. Okay, forget about them, right? There's another recognized lineage who can be king. Okay, let this guy be king instead, right? So there's no problem, right? So monarchic rulership, right? The politics of monarchy is actually pretty functional, right? It's actually all right, Now let's think about the incentive structure of democracy. So whereas monarchy is a competition for the best leader, democracy is the competition for the best criminal, right? Because no one can be held accountable in a democracy because everyone is king, right? So when you're the elected official, you want to be a parasite, you want to be a thief, you want to be a charlatan, you want to be a liar, you want to be a war criminal, you want to be a fraudster, right? So democracy breeds the best psychopaths, the best killers, the best robbers, the best criminals, right? So if there's an election, right, who's going to win the presidency? It's going to be the best criminal, the best liar, right? The guy who lies to the public and says, I will do good for you, you will benefit from voting for me, right? He's lying, right? Because obviously the promises are not going to materialize. Because if you think that by adding another government program, by adding more bureaucracy to the already parasitic bureaucracy, if you think that adding another bureaucratic program, another government program will actually improve the economy and improve the lives of the common people, you're mentally retarded, right? Because the government is a parasite. The government is an anti-productive entity that wastes money. It cannot benefit anyone. It can only steal from you. It can only kill people, right? The government can only do harm and evil, not good, right? The government cannot benefit you. It can only harm you, right? So, but the elected official is going to lie to you. They're going to say, look, okay, vote for me and basically vote for me and I'll give you money, right? That's what elected officials will do. Vote for me, I'll give you money. Vote for me, you'll be rich. And he's lying, right? What he's actually going to do is when you vote for him, because he sounds so good, right? He's better at lying than the other elected officials, right? He makes up a bunch of nonsense programs. He makes up a bunch of fictional stories. Like he makes up a bunch of, very confident sounding but empty rhetoric, right? And he's backed by a bunch of oligarchs, so so he wins the election, right? Is he actually going to deliver on his promises? No. What he's actually going to do, he's going to steal your money, right? He's going to steal the money of his voters. He's going to give them back a bit, right? So he's going to steal $1 million. He's going to give back $1, right? It's like, it's like, let's say someone's eating a Big Mac, right? You steal his Big Mac, you eat half of it, and you give him the other half, right? Or let's say, let's say a homeless man is eating a sandwich, right? He's in the process of biting on a sandwich. You steal his sandwich, you eat the rest of the sandwich, and then you give him back one breadcrumb, right? That is what elected officials do. They steal your money, they give you back a few breadcrumbs, and they say that they have fulfilled their promise, and therefore you have benefited. No, they have stolen from you, right? Elected officials are crooks. And that democracy is just a competition for the best criminals to be elected, right? Now, so yeah, that's the problem. And Hans Hermann Hoppe, right? Hoppe, Hoppe, right? Hoppe has a great book called Democracy, the God That Failed. Very, if you want a more extensive criticism of democracy. Now I want to talk about the new dominant religions of the world, right? Because ultimately, politics is shaped by religion, right? politics doesn't actually exist. It's all religion. It's all about who do you worship or what do you worship. Right. So we have Judaism. We have Christianity, and then we have Islam, right? I didn't mean to. Okay, there we go. And then we have secular all right, so these are the four dominant religions of today, and they basically they are the centers of power in politics, right? So Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and secular democracy, right? And so there's different kinds of variants of these religions, right? Most of them, right? So look, so under Judaism, you have Zionism, right? For example, and then you have basically universalism, right? And so secular democracy is the leftist trinity, right? God of reason, which is the God of reason, which is egalitarianism, moral universalism, and democracy. And so they're basically aligned, right? They basically get absorbed into each other. And then here we have and then you have right, liberalism's a loose term, so yeah. All right, so these are the four most powerful religions of our time: Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and secular democracy. Right, those are the four. And let's go through like the main types of these religions. Right. So let's begin with Judaism. The two main types of Judaism are Zionism and Universalism. So what is Zionist Judaism? Right. Well, it's basically an ethno-nationalist ideology that basically thinks that Israel should be, the regional hegemony of the Middle East, right? So a lot of this goes back to Old Testament canon, which is basically that Israel will rule over the Middle East, and they will be the dominant power of that area, and maybe even of the entire world, right? So arguably there are aspects of Zionism, or at least subsets within Zionism, which are ethno-supremacist, right? And that's why Judaism is very controversial, because you can't actually separate the ethnicity of Jews from the religion of Jews, because Judaism is an ethno-religion. So the problem with talking about Jews is that the only way to not be anti-Semitic is to not talk about Jews, right? So yeah. And by the way, everything I say in this video is for entertainment, educational, and comedic purposes. Okay, so this is basically ethno-nationalism in favor of Israel, right? Right. Right, and then there's the other type of Judaism, which is basically universalism. So by universalism, I just mean, okay, the Jews who are universalistic support the secular democracy, right? They support the leftist trinity. They support human rights for everyone. And this is because, if you are a Judaist, right, or if you're a Jew, there are two different lessons you can take from the Holocaust. One lesson you can take from the Holocaust is that everyone should have human rights to prevent prevent this kind of tragedy from happening, to prevent these atrocities and oppression and genocide, right? So to prevent these racist and discriminatory genocides from occurring, to prevent these horrors of World War II from occurring, if you're thinking as a Jew, you're thinking, okay, we should support universal human rights for everyone. We should support legal equality, and therefore we should support the Enlightenment rationalist paradigm of secular democracy, which is the leftist trinity, right? Which is moral universalism, right? So that's the universalistic viewpoint of many Jews. The other lesson you can take from the Holocaust is that no, we shouldn't have equality. Israel should be very powerful, and as long as us Jews, us Israelis are powerful, then no one can pick on us, no one can bully us anywhere, right? And therefore we should be Zionists. And so those are two different lessons you can take from the Holocaust. Now, let's look at Christianity. So let's look at three different types of Christianity. The first type will be Zionism, which is self-explanatory, right? They're Zionist Christians. Whereas, Judaic Zionists, want Israel to be a powerful regional state, or even the most powerful state in the world, right? Whereas Zionists want Israeli dominance because of the Old Testament contract with Hashem, with God, right? Christianity wants the Middle Eastern conflicts to occur. Christianity wants Israel to be at war with people, because then the second coming of Jesus will occur, right? The second coming. So the Zionist Christians and the Zionist Judaists, right? They have some political alignment, but obviously they have religious differences. And it is traditional Christianity, right? So traditional Christianity is basically Christianity which is independent of Judaism and Zionism, right? So I'm not really gonna go too much into traditional Christianity because I don't know enough about it, right? So I'll just kind of ignore it. But basically, you could say that they're similar to Islam, basically. That's my opinion, at least, and they are a genuine religion of their own, right? The traditional Christians, they are a legitimate power base, and Yeah. And then there's mid Christianity, right? So what do I mean by mid Christianity? Well, let's say you go to McDonald's and you want a McChicken, right? And it comes with a Happy Meal. You get, like a bottle of yogurt. You get some apple slices, right? You get some coloring book, right? You can, get some crayons and draw some pictures, right? Mid Christianity is like basically a watered down, diluted version of traditional Christianity, right? And it's basically a servant of secular democracy, right? What's mid Christianity? Mid Christianity is LGBT Christianity, right? It's when you combine Christianity with Enlightenment leftism, right, with the secular trinity. So when you combine Christianity with leftist secularism, you get mid Christianity, right? Like Christianity where there's a pride flag on the church, right? There's a transgender flag in the church, and when you go to a church meeting and why read the Bible where you have a drag queen in the church, right? It's like, they're dancing and stuff, so that's mid Christianity, right? And I would say mid Christianity is basically very much aligned with secular democracy, right? And then Islam, right? Islam is its own independent religious power base. I don't know enough about Islam, so I'm not going to really talk about it. Yeah. In my opinion, okay, and okay, I'm not contradicting myself, but I'm gonna do it anyways, okay? I think Islam is basically superior to Christianity as a religion overall, right? Because the Christianity believes in nonsensical things like the Trinity, right? It's incoherent. It's a square circle. It's a contradiction, right? It's completely irrational. So I don't know why the Trinity is even taken seriously. And so Islam is really, if you want a better religion than Christianity, you should consider Islam. It's much better. Now let's look at secular democracy, right? So secular democracy is the fourth religion, and basically it's just egalitarianism, right? So it's actually a nothing burger. So what we'll do is I'm going to erase secular democracy, right? It's a nothing burger. And what this, it's basically a passive shell for multinational corporate interests, right? So right, so what is secular democracy actually? It doesn't exist because it's just egalitarianism. Egalitarianism is just a hollow husk. It's a passive substrate for other actors to use for their interest. So sorry about that. Um really secular democracy, what it actually means is international corporatism, or the paradigm that the multinational corporations and the BlackRock class of the world should rule the world, right? So obviously, you know what international corporations are, right? They're for-profit conglomerates that want, to engage in economic expansion across the world. What is the BlackRock class? BlackRock is basically like an asset holding company which holds trillions of dollars, right? So why does BlackRock exist, and how is it so financially powerful? Well, when you become old, right? So let's say you're 65, right? You're a very old man now, and you want to retire, right? So in order to retire, you have to sell your soul to Satan, right? So what you do is you give your money to BlackRock, right? So you give your money to these pension funds, and all these pension funds, right? Not all of them, but like, okay, so these BlackRock companies, right? They're going to manage your pension funds so that you have a stable source of income, and so that assets are backing your pension fund, right? So that's why BlackRock is economically viable. That's why the BlackRock class exists, because you need these pension holders need money, right? These pension holders need money for when they're old and they can't walk up the staircase and they can't work anymore, right? That's why you have BlackRock class. And then the international corporations, the we have a world where everyone is willing to trade with each other, where they're willing to put their differences aside, then these international corporations can become very wealthy. Unfortunately, people cannot put their differences aside. So really, the international corporatism, the international corporations, right? The paradigm of secular democracy is actually just a cover-up for international corporatism. But even international corporatism, right? The economic structure of society is still a passive substrate for religious actors to utilize, right? Because think about it, these corporations, right? These massive corporations around the world, they don't have religious ideologies. People who do have religious ideologies are going to conquer people who don't have religious ideologies. Why? Because religion gives you a purpose to fight for and die for, and if you lack that purpose, you will be obliterated, right? People often criticize radical religious fundamentalists for being violent for their God, right? So atheists will often make the joke that nobody is going to, engage in killing or suicide bombing for atheism, right? Think of the absurdity, the played out joke that I am going to die for nothing, right? But often this is used as a piece of criticism against religion. Actually, no, it's a compliment, right? Because it shows that people are willing to die and fight for something. And often atheists think and secularists think that they are better people because they're not willing to fight and die for a god. When this is nonsense, right? All it shows that you are inefficacious, you are impotent, you are weak, right? So you're not willing to die for anything. Therefore, you are inferior to the religious people who are willing to die for something, right? So, so who is actually controlling the world? It's Judaïs, Christians, and Islam, right? These are the three most powerful actors in the world, right? In terms of like from a collective perspective. And the secular democracy power base, it's really just international corporatism. But as I showed, international corporatism is just a passive shell for religious ideologies to dominate, right? So if you want power in this world, your best bet is joining one of these religions, or making your own religion. I made my own religion. So far, nobody has joined it. So it's not very successful so far. But yeah, anyways, that is the video for today. I think I'll end my series for power and religion here. And so if there's any questions and any comments, you can leave it. See you in the next one.